A knitting friend recently got in touch with us to say that the needles in one section of her AM3 knitting machine were flopping. She wondered if we knew what to do about it. Before we go any farther, let me clear up some mystery about the knitting machine. The AM3 is a Knittax or KnitKing model. The history of knitting machines is full of confusion because the same names were sometimes used for different companies. KnitKing is an example. The majority of KnitKings around today are just like brother machines, manufactured in the same place, just a different label. These KnitKings are just like Knittax machines and absolutely nothing like brother machines. This is my AM3, labeled KnitKing. And this is the one we're going to go into to explore the needle retaining mechanism, identify it, and make suggestions about what one could do if it was not working right. If you own a Knittax or KnitKing similar to this, you may also enjoy my playlist on the subject. The pattern for this slouch baby hat is being added in June of 2023, and I have more Knittax explorations coming on the same playlist. You are watching us explore to find the needle retaining mechanism because we haven't actually needed to do anything to this particular machine in that regard. So this is a journey of discovery. Jack assessed that the one of the two steel bars that's nearest the hook end of the needle is the most likely position for the needle retaining mechanism. He thought it best to loosen all the screws before trying to actually remove any of them. The screws match up with nuts that are accessible from the underside of the machine. With the screws loosened but not yet freed from the nuts, our needles began being very loose and floppy, just like my friend's. In order to remove the nuts, it's necessary to prop the machine up because you need a hand underneath as well as a hand on top.
You might think, looking at these screw heads in this recessed position, that it's just a little tiny screw, but it is not. It is a very long screw with a nut on the bottom side. Very long nut, very long screw with a nut on the back side. You do not want to do what would be obvious, turn it over and work on it, because we don't want to disturb any of these guys right here, and we don't know what's under here. So now we're going to see what's under here, and there is a spring.
Similar to a Passive and Superba, though.
Right.
From here, this one looks slimmer. What do you think?
It's pretty small. I'll show you. This is my smallest screwdriver shank, and the spring is smaller than that.
I would say 3 millimeters. Guessing?
Yeah, that's probably a good guess.
Is there
2.5 to 3?
And although there's a line showing there, that's from where the bar presses in. There doesn't appear to be any content.
Right, you can see from the bottom side of the bar, this is the spot that presses right here, and you can see the slot that the needle runs in.
Now, my spring is in perfect condition, a rare thing around here, but it is. So I've had zero trouble. However, I know from Passive and Superba use,
I wouldn't touch it.
Right? If you get coils that are either full of fuzz or distorted from long use, you get needles that misbehave.
It looks like it's pegged on either end.
And because mine is in nearly new condition, we're not going to disturb it.
No, we're going to put the cover back on it and let it rock and roll like it is.
But that should be helpful to people who are having a performance problem. What would you think if you cannot find a spring the right size? Because this is going to be tricky. Even if the passive spring is not thicker, which I think it is, it's not as long.
Right.
So what would we recommend people try to control the movement of the needles if a spring was truly unavailable?
Right off the top of my head, I would say a very small piece of rubber tubing. And it's not really rubber, it's neoprene or
Yeah.
it's Buna.
You know what? I have very successfully substituted rubber tubing for sponge bars.
Yes.
And some of them have been in position now, I think 4 years, at
Right.
least, maybe
The
5.
the drawback would be that, see, that spring is probably a good piece of steel, and therefore it's got a long life ahead of it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you use even Buna, which is what your O-rings are, and it's tough stuff, but it's going to have a wear factor. So you may have to replace it if you use the machine a lot, maybe every few years.
But
But
still
getting the
actually,
use of the machine would
this
be worth
step was not that difficult. It took maybe 10 minutes to get them all out, just because there are quite a few, and it's going to take the same to get them back. But as long as you don't disturb anything, this is not a deal breaker.
No, I wouldn't think so.
I have another thought too, based on some other machines, toy machines that I have used. I had advice from a friend to look for a bootlace the right diameter,
Right.
to lay in a channel that was similar, not identical. And it worked, in fact, brilliantly. So that would be another option, a slender cord or bootlace, because they're very, very tightly braid woven together. Is that the right word for what?
Yes. I would say right off the top of my head that leather, a strip of leather would work really well.
And that's a possibility. Like any sponge bar or spring, it is allowing the needles to move freely, but not just to rollick around. They have a little tension against them. So that's what we would be wanting to simulate.
Right. Just a little bit of resistance. The thing about leather is you can put silicone on it or a drop of oil on it and it'll stay. The axle tubes on your car have a seal around the axle, and those seals go bad and it'll drip axle fluid out into your brake area. And the original seals were made by CR, which stands for Chicago Rawhide. They were leather seals. In my '69 Ford, I had the original leather seals in. And
still any good?
Yeah, that was, let's see, when did I have that? 1990. So from 69 to 90, they finally wore out.
That's a sad tale.
Ah, no, they owed me money on those.
Planned obsolescence. You gotta hate it. No, I think that a substitute will probably work based on the fact that I have succeeded with substituting before. I will say that I've done really well with I-cords, and I think this is not a case where we can knit a snug I-cord small enough for that channel.
I wouldn't think so. That's awfully small. But I think if you had a piece of it, you could get out your micrometer and measure it and then go from there.
There are purveyors who will send you custom springs.
Yes.
They've already got long amounts of the coil made up.
Right.
But if they can figure out the other parameters, diameter being important, and tension is somewhat important, isn't it?
Yes. The spacing between the coils is absolutely necessary on this machine. That's why I would say, like your boot lace idea or a strip of leather.
It's going to need to be a very high quality, even strip. Not something we could manage with an X-Acto, probably.
I wouldn't think so.
But something that real outdoorsmen would use.
Well, for leather working, they sell
the sewing.
Yeah,
the
strapping
sewing
to sew them with.
That might work.
And that would work. And then you can get that in a number of sizes depending on what your project is.
I just remembered another thing that I've used that might work. For sewing leather, sometimes we use a strong waxed cord that's
Yes.
much thicker than thread, but much thinner than anything we could knit.
Right.
And it's extremely sturdy.
But that's the type of thing you're looking for, because it's the tension that this bar puts on that spring that holds the needle. So our friend that's having a problem is probably looking at a broken spot or a distorted spot.
I would agree, especially since it's only in one area of the bed, and that's usually symptomatic of those springs having distortions. On another note, but related, when you change the needle in a machine that has a spring tensioner of this type, that's when you need to be really careful. And that's why they sometimes say to change the needle, cut the old one to remove it, because the needle hook can pull your spring and damage it permanently.
Yes. The spacing between the coils of the spring is of the utmost importance.
Now, there is a possible piece of good news for anybody who has a spring that's not performing well. It can just be buildup of fuzz. And you can go in there and very daintily use a dental probe and pick it out and lubricate behind it.
Yep, you might even have a strong enough vacuum in the shop vac to suck the crud out. And this is not easy. I'm making it look like it's a piece of cake, but it is not.
Yeah, but our viewers are smart and dexterous. They can do it.
Yep.
What have you found to be the ideal size screwdriver? Let's share that with our friends.
3/16 by 3 inch.
3/16 by 3 inches, what I use to dismantle. I see you're having better success with one that has a swivel handle putting back.
Yes. The final tightening, I will use that 3/16 tip. It fits this slot really well. And that's what's important, not to distort the slot of the screw.
One other thought. Immediately upon loosening our screws, Jack said, watch this, the needles flop. And they did, just like my friend's machine. So you could possibly simply have an area where a screw wasn't adequately tightened down to its nut.
Yes, and I will say this. I loosened every one of these screws thinking that it's a threaded boss and the screw is screwed into it.
Which is really common in knitting machines.
And once I had loosened each one where it would spin around just like it's doing right here, just like that, it wouldn't back out.
But at that point, the needles would not have knitted nicely because they were floppy.
Yes, the minute the screw was loose, which what I actually did was break the torque of the nut on the underside. And so once it was loose, the needles went to flopping all over the place.
So I guess step number one, check the tightness of all your nuts and bolts.
Yes. That would be what I would tell someone to do.